I really had the privilege, and the timing of this is very providential, because just this past week, we're trying to schedule and reschedule. I was able to get together with a wonderful group of several couples, longtime OLPH members. I think some of them are even here. And it was just a great opportunity to be with them, enjoy their hospitality, but hear their experience of the church, certainly of this parish. But a topic came up that I often hear about, which is, maybe not all of our kids go to Mass anymore. They were all raised that way. Maybe not their grandkids. I'm the youngest of 7. If I'm brutally honest, most of my siblings, don't go to Mass. We were all raised Catholic. And they don't hate the church. They haven't stopped believing in God. And I honestly think if we see a drop-off in either church attendance or church involvement, yes, a lot of the horrific abuse scandals and things have something to do with that. But I honestly believe most of the time the answer, if you got, why aren't you involved anymore, is that it's a kind of apathy or irrelevance. I just don't see that involvement with this faith is relevant for me today. Most people aren't living with a fear of hell if they don't celebrate the sacraments. So then what is it? Well, it's where I need to be fed or engaged. I'm just not associating that with my church. So a word that's come up in church parlance these days, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, are the nuns, right? Not the Sister Paul Ann's, but the N-O-N-E-S. People who say, what's your religious affiliation? None. I have nothing. And that's seemingly a growing percentage. Bishop Barron and other people often talk about this group, the seminarians that I'm with. How are we going to get out there and re-evangelize? But every time someone asks me, how many nuns are there in America? My answer is none. And I really believe that. And here's what I mean. The word religion, as probably many of you know, the roots of it are very interesting. The lig part in religio is where we get the word ligament from. What holds things together. I'm no doctor, but I'm guessing ligaments hold your bones to muscles or something like that. So religio is that thing that holds you together. It holds a people together. It unites a community. At its core, that's what religion is and does. And the fundamental reason that people need or want to be held together has never changed. When I'm not renegotiating union contracts or worrying about leaky roofs these days at the seminary, my day job is teaching Scripture. And one thing that's very evident when you sit with Scripture is that the fundamental things that move people hasn't changed. We want to fall in love. We want to make a difference for our families. We want to improve the world. We worry about many of the same things that we've always worried about. So when I say that there are really no nuns, what I mean is that everybody today has the same concerns they had 100 years ago, the same concerns they had, when Thomas Aquinas was walking the earth, the same concerns they had when Jesus said to Peter, come after me, and I'll introduce you to something you've never imagined in your wildest dreams. And if we forget that, then it's easy to become pessimistic. And it's easy to say, oh my gosh, our churches are emptying out. The task that we need to, once again, reinvigorate for ourselves is simply saying, how is it that we connect with, meet with, address those same fundamental needs for religioing, right? For coming together, for staying together, that we've always done. Of course, that means we need to ask tough questions, brutally honest questions maybe, but they're not questions that can't be answered. All it takes is some creativity. I think it takes a lot of courage because it means facing fears. But facing fear is something religion is really very good at. And it's going to be the places that still have that sense of community and still have that sense of our church community, where now I'm using it in a more traditional sense. Our church, our parish, still is accomplishing, what religion was always meant to do. That's going to be the jumping off point for the reinvigoration. It's been that way throughout the history of the church. And so yes, OLPH, I'm looking at you. In no small way, a parish like this has a real important role, and I would even say responsibility, because the church is always local. You know, if Tip O'Neill were here, he'd tell you that. All church is local. And we can, wax poetic about the universal church, and it is that, to be sure, but people's experience of church and religion is what's they're encountering. I always say to the seminarians, because Mundelein is a diocesan seminary, so we're not associated with a religious order like Notre Dame or Georgetown or whatever, but I say to the seminarians, when the stuff hits the fan at 3 o'clock in the morning because something is falling apart in someone's life, and they reach out to the church, they're going to be going to your place. They're going to be going to the church on the corner or whatever it is within the nearest 5-mile radius. And maybe they haven't been inside a church in decades, but they're going to be knocking on your door. And of course, in much happier times as well, how is it that we are interacting and interfacing with those core fundamental needs that really have never changed? And I think if we can just keep that in mind, what remains eternal as the Holy Spirit, as eternal as Jesus Christ himself, what remains eternal is the human condition. And I don't care how society changes or alters, that is not going to change as long as we are breathing. We just have to be willing to extract that fundamental, non-negotiable truth from whatever the current circumstances are. So that being said, a lot of thought is going into the Archdiocese these days with Renew My Church, that's already been alluded to, around the very question that we're considering, that you all are considering. What is it that makes for a vibrant parish? What is the church of the future going to need to look like if we're meeting those needs and those goals? But a word that gets used a lot is missionary discipleship. That, what we're really called to be are missionary disciples, if we're going to be a healthy church going forward. And that can sound kind of buzzwordy, but again, I'll go back to the Acts of the Apostles. What does missionary mean? Missionary means Jesus sometimes politely, sometimes forcefully grabbing you by the collar, saying, come with me, because I've got somewhere for you to go. Come to me, let's spend some time together, and then go away from me. Okay? I don't know if Jesse is still here. The seminarians hear me say this all the time. I'm not there to hold your hand. We're here to give you good formation, but at the end of the day, you've got to go out. And don't be afraid about going out, because that's what it looked like with Jesus himself. Go out, 2 by 2. I'll be here. We can always touch base. We'll talk about it. You've been given more formation than you may realize. I'm confident in you, Jesus says to them, so you grow in confidence yourself. So that's the missionary piece. Discipleship simply means, discipula, student. It simply means you're not just going out on your own ego. You're not going out on whatever pedigree you were maybe fortunate enough to be born into. You are going out because you have learned from me, Jesus is saying to them, and I believe saying to all of us. You all wouldn't be here this morning if that weren't already a dynamic in your life. And so, again, some of the language that gets used around missionary discipleship is it has to be rooted in a personal encounter with Jesus Christ. Absolutely. But sometimes people can hear that language and maybe it just, that sounds a little bit churchy. I don't disagree with it, but we have this concern in our parish. I know I should be close to Jesus. I should be a missionary disciple, but we've got to do this. But our churches are empty. But there are all these challenges. It's not the church of my grandparents. What are we going to do about this? And stubbornly, I think we need to fall back on that language, but we need to unpack it, To have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is not just a buzzword. That looks like something. It looks like the folks in this room. Because every one of you are here, I believe, because of your involvement in various ministries. I'll bet if I asked for people, raise your hand if you're only involved in one ministry, not a lot of hands would go up. But that's what it looks like to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Or at least that's an integral part of it. I care about the people that I serve. I'm here because somebody asked me to do it. Well, that's a missionary discipleship answer, Father Dustman seems like a pretty formidable figure. And yet, in his own way. That was his deep relationship with Christ, and he shared that. And everything around us, yeah, absolutely, an amazing infrastructure. But that's one variant of saying, here's a closeness with God as I'm experiencing it, and I want to share it with you. So when two people care enough about each other to say, I want you to share in this mission, or I think you have a gift or a talent, and you'd be really great at that. Whoever said that's not a deeply religious thing, and we can all kick back and tell a joke here or there, oh yeah, he twisted my arm, or he was great at that, but that's what it looks like. I think Jesus twisted more than a few arms, if you kind of read between the lines, the Gospels. We're going to have Zacchaeus this weekend, right? Boy, talk about arm twister. Remember, Jesus invites himself to dinner. Boy, I don't have Mass here this weekend, but if I did, I'd milk this group. You could get so much mileage out of this, right? But that's it. That's what it looks like. That's Father Dustman. Hey, Zacchaeus, I see you up there. You thought you could hide from me. But what was Zacchaeus doing? He wasn't really hiding. He couldn't look away. He couldn't look away. He climbs the tree. He kind of wants to be in the background because he knows he's not so popular. But he's got to look at this guy. There's something there that draws him. And that hasn't changed over 2,000 years. I really, really believe that. So, okay, maybe we don't have the Altar and Rosary Society, and maybe we don't have the Knights of Columbus as thriving as it once was. In other places it is thriving. But that's okay. Those served the needs that were needed to be met then in that particular way, but those needs, that fundamental core human desire, hasn't gone anywhere. And so when Jesus looks at Zacchaeus and says, I see you looking at me, and I know there's a reason for it, and now I'm going to invite myself to dinner. And then you see the change in Zacchaeus, which is really beautiful, because at our core, we like to be asked. I really believe that. We like to know that somebody thinks enough of us to say, hey, I really would love for you to help me with that. And there's a reason why, what's the rule? The 10% do 90% of the work or whatever that is. Well, okay, that hasn't changed much over time. They're the ones who respond to the direct ask, and then probably through them, they're the ones who extend the invitation to others. And that's how it spreads. Some people are the direct lines of engagement, and then through them, sometimes others get drawn in, and that's perfectly fine. And whatever the church of tomorrow is going to look like, it's going to be that same dynamic. So that idea of missionary discipleship, a relationship with Jesus, so it often begins through the interpersonal encounter. Peter didn't have a clue who Jesus was. He didn't know where that journey was going to lead. The guy, Jesus of Nazareth, had some sort of appeal for him. And Jesus wasn't on social media, and we live in an age of celebrity sometimes, and a lot of times we can get caught up in that. But at the end of the day, if the other side of the blogosphere isn't someone who genuinely cares about you, and isn't somebody who in some way is going to have face-to-face interaction with you, that's going to get kind of stale after a while. And I know, incidentally, our communications guy at Mundelein puts my stuff out over every place. Usually on solicitation letters, and I know that too. But at the end of the day, that's meaningless unless someone is looking you in the eye and you're having that direct experience. That's why I believe parishes are never going to die. They may evolve. No, we're not going to have the Irish parish, the German parish, the Polish parish, all on 3 street corners. I don't know that that's such a bad thing, to be honest with you. I mean, it met a particular need and a particular sociology, but I don't think that's the best model of church. And certainly today, those days are just gone. Now the Germans are marrying the Poles and they're adopting, the Nigerians, and that's a very beautiful, picture of church. That shouldn't frighten us. But that same, as I said, dynamic is always going to be there. In the Archdiocese, they also talk about some fundamental qualities, that the parish of tomorrow is going to need to have. There are 5 of them. Let me just rattle them off, and then I'm just going to focus on one. And then we'll wrap it up. I promise we'll be done by 11. But the 5 elements that they talk about for a parish that's going to make and sustain missionary disciples are these. It's going to need to have what they call soft entry points. What does that mean? Soft points of entry. This means ways of getting engaged that are outside of Mass. Ways of getting engaged that don't necessarily mean, hey, show up the 10th. That can be very effective at times, but usually if you're going to trust someone to say, hey, come to Mass with me, it's because you've already begun to develop some relationship. So what are these soft points of entry? Well, I feel like I waded through a parking lot of it coming over here. It's people dropping off gifts, or when's your big holly greenery thing? Is that next week? I say that with deep respect. That's coming up, right? And really thriving parishes, they have those kinds of things. But there are folks who are going to go get their wreath or drop off presents for kids who've maybe never come to Mass here. And that's their soft point of entry, because maybe they really care about kids getting presents, or they really care about, not only having that greenery in their home, but maybe they generously share it with another. Well, whoever said that's not real church? Whoever said that's not real experience? And that is not going to go away. People are not going to stop caring about children who need gifts at Christmas or whatever. Now, you could think of a lot of other versions of what those soft points of entry are. But I think they're spot on when they say you've got to have those. There's a program called Alpha that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's a very well thought out program of how do you invite people in to begin to experience a relationship with God that is not meet me for Mass at noon. You're meeting in people's homes. And the language used is but you don't need Alpha. You don't need a particular program necessarily. It's just real simple invitation. But being savvy enough to know that, we know this when we fall in love, right? You don't just go from eyeing somebody at the staff Christmas party to proposing them, the next day, hopefully. It takes time. It takes time to get to the altar in many ways, right? Whether you're exchanging rings or you're going for communion. It takes time to get to the altar. And so let it begin gently. And don't let anyone tell you, well, that's watered down Catholicism, or, give me some good old-fashioned catechesis. That's often how it begins. The second thing you need, and this is the one I'm going to elaborate on in a minute, radical hospitality. I love that phrase, radical hospitality. Now, that doesn't mean, so-so hospitality is Dunkin' Donuts and radical is Krispy Kreme, or, we'll have 2 carafes of coffee instead of 1. It means really letting that concept seep into your bones, that whoever answers the phone at the parish, they're doing that with the sense of, this is maybe the only voice of church that whoever is on the other end of that phone may hear, And it can be as simple as, I'm in a lousy mood today, but doggone it, when I answer that phone, there's something really special going on here, right? And that may sound small, but no. A parish that really gets it, that's what it looks like. And so everyone, and again, to quote Lowell's phrase of preaching to the choir here, but I'll speak for myself and maybe for some of you, I'm a priest, so there's plenty of times I don't practice radical hospitality. Jesse can certainly attest to that now. Father Patrick, you're not allowed to say anything. Father Patrick actually lived on my floor when he first came to Mundelein. So, as I like to say, everything you like about him is entirely due to me. And everything you don't like about him is due to every other priest at Mundelein. So, radical hospitality. The third one, vibrant, transformative liturgies, right? Because when they finally do go from that soft point of entry into a liturgy, now, vibrant and transformative, here again, it doesn't have to mean, it's the circus Mass. It doesn't have to mean it just affectively blows you away. And every parish has a different, feel to it, dynamic. St. John Kartje is not the same thing as St. Sabina, is not the same thing as OLPH. You're very blessed to have Russell here, but I'm sure for folks, you've seen music directors come and go over the years. But that's not primarily what I mean. You should have, hopefully, well-trained professionals who can help lead in that. But it's participation. It's the invitation to the choir. And, maybe you don't sing like someone from lyric opera, but, there's a place for you. And I remember when I was a kid, my role in the choir was carrying stuff, because I couldn't carry a tune, so I carried stuff. But there was that sense of involvement because the lady who ran the choir just said, look, you're going to do this. Preaching is huge, right? And if I hear one thing when somebody, oh, you're the guy who runs the seminary, it's preaching. But here's where that vibrant, vital parish, I always try to say again, you guys get this, but share this with the people who don't get it. Catholicism is not a spectator sport, right? It's not about, I showed up on Sunday and what are you going to give me? And, well, they give me good stuff here, so that's where I go. So preaching is a great example of that. Feedback, constructive, supportive, affirmative, but feedback can be critical. Or what's even better, and I've rarely met a priest who didn't appreciate this, just the opportunity to get together in maybe little groups and say, hey, Father, let me clue you in to kind of what's going on in the parish. Because hopefully, sure, the priest has a good sense, but this is a big parish, not going to be aware of everything. Funerals, not always aware of the impact of somebody passing on. And to just be able to share those stories a little bit. What if, amongst all the other ministries, the parish just had something called the homily coffee group or something, and just invited Father to sit and so he could feed off of, right? Like I said, I'm sure this gathering is going to weave its way into homilies you hear this weekend. But that's the way it should be. It's not desperately grasping for ideas. And one of the hardest things, like for me, now I just ride the circuit, and you're always turning up in parishes that aren't your own, is you really don't know the temperature of the community when you walk in. And that's one of the hardest things to do. So for the parish priest who really is embedded there, to let that be a cycle back and forth. And I mean, some people can talk like Bishop Barron. It's not about flashiness, I think. I think people know if the preacher loves them and has really got some connection with them. And that really, at the end of the day, is what folks appreciate. Not just appreciate, but need, right? That's this idea of a vital parish. Readiness-based formation. And this is a contentious point in some places. Readiness-based formation. In other words, we're not a sacrament factory. There's not a conveyor belt. So it's not necessarily the case that, oh, you got to this grade, so now you get this sacrament. Or, you went through, you're in the RCIA cycle, we finished up, Easter's here, so you're going to get, baptized or confirmed. And I know good RCIA programs, they discern that better, but in some places, do we have the courage to say, we're going to bring people into those sacraments of initiation? And I mean things like, little kids with communion and junior high kids with confirmation, to let that be a process that is fluid enough in its discernment. Now, as I say, I know that's contentious because, my gosh, I got my school and there's all these kids and what are we going to do about it? And, if they're not confirmed, what's going to happen? But if the kid is like, yeah, confirm me, don't confirm me, then my goodness, we should hold our feet to the fire. And I got to do the same thing with ordination. When a guy comes in, the expectation is in 4 years you get ordained. It takes a lot of guts for a bishop to say, no, this guy needs an extra year or two. But these parishes need priests. So this goes all the way around, but this idea of readiness-based, that those sacraments are critical. They're not rewards for doing your time. Now think of what a parish would look like where everybody was so directly invested, that the people would feel supported, but that they would ultimately go into those really critical transition moments when they were truly ready and the parish was truly ready to receive them. So maybe that's the most ambitious of the five. The last one is outward-oriented, sense, an outward orientation. So pastoral care that's always thought to be outward-directed, certainly within the community as well. But again, so many of you get that, all of you get that, many of you are ministers of care, but it's more than that. It's the willingness to talk about your faith. It's the willingness to share. Hey, here's what's going on. Before you maybe share what's going on at OLPH even, it's just saying, hey, I just had an amazing experience in prayer. And to not feel awkward about that. Or maybe you do feel awkward, but you're going to do it anyways. I just want to share with you what my faith has meant over the years. Or I was at this funeral and suddenly I just realized how incredibly moving, as we were all together. But wow, deep, deep faith, but that's what it looks like. It looks like the log cabin that becomes the church, that becomes the people traveling to Wilmette because that's where their families are. Now, what does it look like for you? And what an opportunity to talk about your experience of faith here. But that's what it is. It's not brain surgery. It's just those little things, but that are embedded in the community. Okay, so the last thing, I already lied to you, but let me go to 11:05. Just talk about the radical hospitality. I think a huge thing, and you have it here with the guilds or the Bible studies, but whatever you call them, small faith communities, I think, are so critical. Because at the end of the day, that's where the trust begins to grow. That's exactly what Jesus did. He talked to thousands, he interacted with crowds, but it was still, hey, can you come with me? And there was always this smaller group. Not because they were more special than everybody else, but there was that formation, okay? And I know for all of you who have that experience, and maybe a generation or two ago it was Christian Family Movement, they go by different names, but it's the same dynamic. It's getting together with people as trust begins to build, and then that invitation is extended. But somehow it is faith-based. Maybe there's some scripture reading, or you got to know these people through OLPH, so obviously God is a part of that. But beg, borrow, or steal. And the one who taught me that is someone who did a lot of stuff here, Father Tom Hickey. I don't see him as often now as I'd like to, shame on me. But I just saw how in all his different ministries, he'd always look for opportunities to just get people going on little things. And so when I was at St. Ben's in the city, something that I did. When I was out in Washington, D.C., I was at Catholic U. We were at a little parish. But that's all we did was start these small faith communities, and they're still going. When I was at Northwestern, at the Shield Center, same thing with the students. And the turnover is huge. That's okay. People come, they go. But the dynamic is foolproof. And that's a great example of radical hospitality. You're not necessarily sitting in church, but that's what enriches the experience at church, right? I don't know if guilds ever go together and just sit in one section, just to show off, right? Wouldn't that be awesome? There they are. That's the guild. Don't sit in my pew. I help out at St. Mary's in Lake Forest sometimes, and they got a pretty good youth group. And the high school kids all sit together. And God love their youth minister because she makes them sit in the front rows. And there is this cluster there week in and week out of teens. They bring each, hey, you're going to show up, because then afterwards they go off and, they have fun. But it just matters, And then when other people see that community, it becomes kind of infectious. New parishioner onboarding. What does that look like in the parish? You talk about radical hospitality. When somebody comes in new, or just when you cross the door for the first time. And this can sound like, oh yeah, but it's everything that somebody's there to greet them. And that means that the greeter, when their friend comes in, doesn't turn their back to talk to their friend for 5 minutes, because when they do that, 50 people have just gone by and they didn't get the little worship aid and they weren't. So that's the radical part of it, It's like, no, this is the greatest thing we can do. And I say to the priest-to-be, get your butt out there, ideally a half hour before the start of Mass, but doggone it, it better be 15 minutes. Be there, That's oftentimes when someone's going to say, hey, you got a minute, or can we talk about this? But for that vibrant parish, they don't just need to talk to Father, they want to talk to you as well. And it can sound so simple, but it makes all the difference in the world. And that is what is going to revitalize places that maybe aren't, or as we get these consolidations, what it's going to look like. What I would call teams around the major sacraments. And here's what I mean, like a baptism team. So even if a parish has an awesome baptism prep, a lot of times that means one or two people who lead those meetings in groups. But why not get a team, like you have a baptism team that actually accompanies that couple. This isn't on the Archdiocese list, but at the top of my list is a vibrant parish is multi-generational. We do way too much uni-generational ministry. Around the 80s is when the young adult ministry craze really got launched. Maybe some of you were part of that. And that's fine, but then nobody wants to stop calling themselves a young adult, right? So then it becomes the Lonely Hearts Club. And It's like, no, the faith should be there from womb to tomb, as we say. But this is my point. It's not you all have to hang out together, right? No, everybody's got their own social group. But it's so sad when the Catholic Church doesn't respect the life, wisdom, and experience. If there's one branch of humanity that ought to honor experience, it should be religion. And I've rarely seen young parents, young moms, young dads who don't appreciate sometimes when they get a little bit of support. So what an awesome thing in a parish for maybe the parents who have the kids that have left and they're empty nesters, or even just kids who are in high school and have been through this a little bit. What if they're not doing the formal sacramental preparation, but they're accompanying some of these first-time parents, And then they're there on baptism day. What if they were just there and you kind of knew who they were, and you have to be creepy about it. They don't have to go back for the cake afterwards, but they're there. And shame on us when we treat baptism as if it's a kind of disease. Well, come after Masses on Sunday when nobody else is there and the church is yours. And if we do it at Mass and Masses, now listen, I'm not trying to tell the priest here how to do anything. OLPH does it fine. It's easy for me because we don't do any of those sacraments at Mundelein. But at least occasionally to weave them into the liturgy when most of the parish is present, right? And a vibrant parish doesn't get angry because they have to stay for 5 extra minutes. And what if that couple, maybe it's the third child they're getting baptized, so they got the rugrats and they're all running around. And what if you just had a group of moms and dads and say, hey, we're going to help with this, just in the church, right? That's it. But what a powerful moment. And then there's follow-up, right? Hey, we were there at your baptism, how's it going? You begin to build a community, and it doesn't take long. And you could do the same thing with, some of the other ministries, even weddings. So maybe not at the wedding day, but I don't know why not, if you didn't cause a big fuss. But follow-up, we all know this, those first 5 years can really be tough. Who's checking up? And what if somehow a parish had enough of a community sense, enough of a religio, that there literally was a group that was following up with the newly married couples. One thing, Father Hickey, I don't know if he did it here, he certainly did it at St. Clement's. He would invite all the 5-year and under married couples, back for a dinner like this, something like that. And it's amazing once people start talking to each other how those things click. So it can look like a lot of different things, but that sense of radical hospitality. And the very last thing I'll say, because Jesse is here and I'm incredibly proud of him, and I know you have Michael and you've had other guys in the past, please, I know you support them, but when you run across a seminarian, to really stress, not just, hey, it's great what you're doing, we're praying for you, but to say, you need to be here. You need to be here. This is absolutely necessary. I can understand that it can be hard and difficult, but their peers are struggling to put food on the table or raise their kids. Every priest, every seminarian, 3 hots and a cot, that's provided. We are incredibly privileged. But there's a kind of formation you're never going to get in the classroom, right? Just like everyone here who's gone through their own mentorship in life, you can't read a book about marriage and, have that all figured out. And if we're ever going to get past that poison of entitlement, where we really get a sense of everyone has a unique role. The ordained minister has a very unique role. The baptized laity have a very unique role. But the only way we fully understand what that looks like, because the leaders of tomorrow, the ordained leaders, the lay leaders, collaboration is going to be absolutely key. But collaboration shouldn't just be, polite toleration. Collaboration really has to mean, I know where I lack, and I need you to help me with this. I know where we each have strengths to come together to be strong. When I was appointed rector, the first thing my board of advisors said is, you don't have a clue how to run, 1,100 acres, $20 million operating budget, 300 employees, And I said, yeah, I do. Go away. No, I didn't. I said, yeah, you're right. So we have our very first ever lay COO who actually, knows what they're doing in that. But those things should be, those should kind of be no-brainers. And that's us helping each other to say, these are the gifts and the skills that I bring, these are the ones that you bring, and you put that together. So my parting word to you, I really mean it, is that there are no nones. Every human being on planet Earth has the same needs, desires, hopes, fears that Peter, Paul, John, Mary, all the rest of them in the New Testament had. You guys know what it looks like here. It will evolve a little bit with the generations, but the spirit that you've built up is evident, and that's what's going to carry you forward. But keep pushing that intergenerational piece. I can't stress that enough. You're down here for the family mass. You see who those folks are. Now invite them, into your homes. Let them invite you, and there's really nothing to be afraid of for the future if we can do that.